For Happy Hour on this Friday, and joining me tonight is our chief producer Jenny Churchill and Evan McMorris-Santoro, reporter and blogger for Talking Points Memo.
Hi.
Thanks for joining me, guys. Happy Friday. You know, we've spoken a few end of the world theories on the show before, especially when everyone thought that the rapture was coming, but the theories never died down, and especially because we haven't gotten to 2012 yet. And so now here's a new one that apparently people are just going crazy over online. Take a look.
Okay, look at the Earth distance, 1.812. Helios right now getting nearer to us by 300,000 miles per day. In about a week, that number is going to be 400,000 miles per day, and it's going to continue to increase. You're going to see more and more volcanoes going off. That's your sign to wake people up. You have 33 volcanoes erupting right now in the Earth, and that number is going to continue to go up as we move along in the timeline.
Vote on the news, and here's the winner. There's a huge hidden heavenly body right here in our solar system. Evidence is mounting that either a brown dwarf star or a gas giant planet is lurking at the outermost reaches of our solar system, far beyond the planet Pluto. According to the British newspaper The Independent, the object is 4 times the size of Jupiter. Experts say the presence of such a massive object could explain why a barrage of comets has been coming from that direction.
It's been almost 10 years since little Pluto was demoted from being a planet, but today scientists from the California Institute of Technology have announced that they finally have solid evidence for a planet X, a true 9th planet on the edge of our solar system.
It is believed to be far beyond the orbit of Pluto, roughly the size of Neptune, with a mass 10 times that of Earth.
There are things out there, little icy objects that are orbiting in a funny way, and nobody was quite sure why. It seemed like there might be something with gravity pulling on them, but nobody quite understood. And finally, these scientists that you talked about took a really hard look at it, did simulations, calculations, and they came up with the explanation. It probably is this giant planet.
I think I read somewhere it orbits the sun every 10,000 to 20,000 years.
Right.
Is that why no one has seen it to this point?
No, that's not why. It's because it's so dim. It's so far away that even though it's big, it's very, very dim, and it'd be very tough to spot with a telescope.
I'm also fascinated at the idea that this planet could be so far out there and still our sun be the mass that is keeping it in the gravitational pull of our solar system.
Right, yeah, but no, it's true.
That's incredible. And so there was a thought at one point from scientists that when they thought that there was something beyond Pluto, that it might have been all the massive objects floating in the Kuiper Belt, but it's not.
Right, so all those objects are out there and they have a lot of mass, and originally the scientists said, look, a planet is such a crazy idea, maybe it's the Kuiper Belt itself that's pulling it on itself and making these orbits look funny.
And when we talk about the mass of this planet X, this 9th planet, being 10 times that of Earth, for those who are not scientists, what does that really mean, the mass of a planet versus Earth's mass?
Well, if you could put it on a scale, how much it would weigh.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really it. And so it's bigger, it's bulkier, it's got more heft, it's got more gravity. It's this huge elephant in the living room, except we didn't know it was there.
You mentioned that scientists haven't seen it yet because of how far away it is and how dim it is. Is there a way for them to get visual evidence?
Yes, so the biggest telescopes in the world can theoretically see this thing if they're looking in exactly the right place. And with the publication of this new paper today, they are now going to start to look in earnest.
How much further out there is this planet X than the rest of the planets in the solar system? I mean, it's
well, so Pluto we think of as the really out at the very edge, the very farthest thing that you could call a planet, even though we don't anymore. And
I'm still supporting Pluto's right to be a planet.
But this thing is 5 times further out than Pluto.
Fascinating. Is there any chance it's not a planet?
No, there's always. It's very foolish to say no chance because you know, you just don't know what you don't know. But the odds are looking very, very good.
60 billion miles from the sun.
Yep.
Amazing stuff. Michael Lemonick, thank you so much. Fascinating stuff.
Great, thanks.
Pluto, the sometimes planet may be hiding a pretty huge secret. Well, two huge secrets, actually. Astronomers in Spain believe that hiding behind Pluto, obscured from our view, are two additional giant planets. Spanish scientists in Madrid discovered the potential for the two massive celestial bodies at the outer reaches of our solar system after studying strange patterns in the orbit of rocky objects around Pluto, including the newly discovered dwarf planet 2012 VP113. Scientists believe the first hidden world would be about 10 times the mass of Earth. They believe that this planet is moving in resonance with a bigger planet that is somewhere between Mars and Jupiter in size and would orbit 200 times the Earth's distance from the Sun. But can we ever conclusively confirm the existence of these two planets? Well, Scott Shepard at the Carnegie Institution for Science had this to say. As there are only a few of these extremely distant objects known, it's hard to say anything definitive about the number or location of any distant planets. However, in the near future, we should have more objects to work with to help us determine the structure of the outer solar system. So there you have it. Time will tell.
Now, here's the asteroid story. An asteroid the size of the Rose Bowl, more than 1,000 feet across, fields its way toward the Earth right now. It'll come by first in 2029, and we'll see it up there. It'll be closer than our satellites, a thing the size of the Rose Bowl hurtling through the air. And then it comes again in 2036, and that's when it may get interesting. The debate over just how close it'll get is sparking some serious debate between Russian scientists and American scientists. Here's a satellite picture of the thing. This is from, well, with this and, you know, this tells you nothing. But you see it there? I don't know, that circly thing in the middle, maybe? This was from 2004. It doesn't look very intimidating here. Both sides seem to agree that in 3 decades, the asteroid will fly very close to Earth. But Russian scientists warn that our planet's gravity could change the asteroid's path and set it on a collision course. NASA scientists say there is a minuscule, little bitty chance of that happening. 1 in 250,000. Better than winning the lotto, and somebody will. Joining us now, Michio Kaku. He's a theoretical physics professor at City University of New York, CUNY. He's also the author of Physics of the Future, and a new book coming out in about a month, and we'll tell you about that in about a month. So, good to see you. 2029, it flies by underneath the satellites.
That's right. Mark it on your calendar. Friday the 13th, April 2036.
Well, that's the second pass.
On the second pass, right? The first pass, like you said, it comes right underneath our satellites. You can actually see it whizzing right overhead.
Wow.
And on the second pass, it might actually be a nation buster. It'll take out Germany. It'll take out France, England.
Not England.
Right. Or the entire northeast of the United States. It'll hit with the force of 100,000 Hiroshima bombs.
Really? If it hits.
If it hits, right. It's a catastrophe beyond human comprehension. And the head of the Russian Space Agency has said that the Russian scientists should think of some ways of deflecting it or handling this menace in 2036.
What are we going to do? Shoot it with a laser?
Well, everyone thinks we'll send Bruce Willis out there with the space shuttle. But the space shuttle can't even reach outer space. We're phasing it out, and the space shuttle only spins wheels around the planet Earth. It cannot even go to deep space. We need a new booster rocket to take us out there.
Maybe China will build us one.
Maybe, and then we have to nudge it out of the way. The farther it is, the easier it is to push it out with rockets.
Greetings, this is Indian in the Machine, transmitting this message from Peru. I wanted to talk a little bit about the big earthquake to come. And I was reading Phoenix Journal number 36. And some of the earthquake information is scattered throughout many of the Phoenix journals. So sometimes you just gotta read the journals and don't expect to be spoon-fed all of your nourishment in one journal. So in Phoenix Journal number 36, they basically talked about the San Andreas fault line being kind of like a cog and having catching and locking into place, if you will, the tectonic plates with one another. And also it's mentioned that the powers that used to be who have been controlling and manipulating our planet have been very busy trying to loosen those cogs so that the whole thing basically is going to go. Perhaps this puts all that fracking along the fault lines into context for everyone. And I found it was interesting that when California basically falls into the Pacific Ocean during the big one, which will be 10 to 12 points, and actually let's say series of big ones, because pretty sure there isn't going to be just one. And this is going to happen very quickly. And the journals say 15 minutes. So that's quite stark. So when you feel the earth start to rumble, if you're in California, and you basically have 15 minutes to somehow get yourself out of the area. And that would include trying to do so while all the roads in front of you and around you are basically not even perhaps usable. I think if you're perceiving that somehow the highways are going to stay clear and all the traffic is going to move smoothly so that you can make your quick getaway, well, if you bought land in California, at this point, you'll pretty much believe anything. And so we compare that scenario with the Louisiana Salt Dome scenario that is in the midst of collapsing right now. And many of us have been watching that for well over a year now. And that scenario has more of a timeline to it. And in fact, people are kind of just asleep on that one because they just think it's just a little pond that's growing. And they don't envision that as the salt dome collapses, basically the entire state of Louisiana is going to fall into the Gulf of Mexico. And then we have the situation on the other side of the Pacific Ocean with Japan. And Japan is basically on the edge of a huge trench. And many geologists also are saying basically Japan's going to be falling into the ocean too. So there are other triggers as well. And my point being is that you're not going to necessarily know which one. But if it is the California one, don't expect that the warning is going to be sufficient to get a person to safety. That doesn't mean that everyone in California is going to perish or anything like that, but I would say pretty much the majority. And some of the future maps of America seem to highlight the new islands of California. So if you're one of the fortunate ones to not prepare, and I don't even think those islands are going to be basically safe because you're going to have tidal waves to deal with. So my message is we're coming down to crunch time with these pending earth changes, and whatever triggers this series of earth changes to come, we don't know. But the time to prepare is now. And if I could add a little tidbit, when people may have the question, well, what do I do to prepare? Well, everything is coming to one big convergence. We're not only dealing with earthquakes, we're dealing with volcanoes, we're dealing with fireballs, we're dealing with a pending pole shift, we're dealing with NIBIRU in our solar system. We're dealing with a shift of basically everything. So if you want to prepare, basically you got to turn to God. And quit turning your back to God and saying, God, show me proof that you exist so that I can turn to you. Because that's pretty much not how it works. And then when you are able to turn to God and stand in God's presence without cowering away, then you were able to perceive your guidance. But let me tell you this, that the governments of Russia and Japan have built underground shelters for all of their citizens. This is mentioned a few times in the Phoenix journals. And most people in America are content to watch their TVs in their plastic and wooden houses. And let me tell you, you're not going to want to be in one of those when the fireballs begin to rain down from NIBIRU. And if you think that the stuff of fireballs and NIBIRU is just a big conspiracy, well, let me say that we've got the bending of our magnetosphere very recently. We've got fireball season, apparently, now, a new term coined by NASA. But what they fail to really be upfront about is where those fireballs are coming from. We've also got a new layer of our radiation belt around our planet. We basically have scores of scientists who are either silent, or they're in on it, or they're trying to tell us the truth and are having a challenge finding an audience. And so, to prepare physically may require basically $300 worth of materials and digging a hole in the ground and covering it with basically earth. If you remember the time of Noah, that was a cleansing by water. This time, we're being cleansed by fire. And so we don't have to dig an ark. We basically need to dig a hole and cover it with earth. And this message will find you with very few days to do so. And it's not like this message hasn't been it's not like this message hasn't been available, because even the Phoenix journals have been available for a long time. 26 years they've been coming out. So that's my message. You can expect the earth changes. You can expect the convergence of the changes of everything, basically. All life as we know it is going through a transformation, and that includes us. As our planet is birthed into a golden age, we're in the contractions right now. And yep, there might be a little bit of pain and discomfort but then new life is birthed. And so I send you the message of new life. That don't perceive all of this as like some big punishment and imminent death, even though there will be chaotic challenges, shall we say. And if you look around you and you see no one else preparing, don't let that put you back to sleep.
We have the North Pole and the South Pole. And we've always known it that way. North Pole's north, South Pole's south. And so it is. But it may not have been that way forever, and there is significant scientific evidence, perhaps even conclusive, that there have been prior polar shifts. In other words, where north goes south and south goes north, right?
That's right.
Now,
absolutely.
Now, how many times in our Earth's history do we think this has occurred?
Well, it depends on the experts you look at, but from what we can gather, probably 7 to 8 times. They're just, I think partially they're guessing because of records, but it has happened a considerable number of times. From a biblical perspective, there is at least probably 2. I believe there was one before the creation of Adam and Eve that you'll find in Genesis. And then it appears as though when the time of Noah's flood came, that also may have incorporated at least a partial polar shift, if not a total one. And then a very interesting event occurred in the days of Peleg, which occurred maybe 250 to 300 years after the flood, in which it says the earth was divided, and that would have been a gigantic earthquake, which, according to the ancient records, set up the nations as we know them today.
The continents? Did it actually change continental formations? I mean, all right, well, let's get down to it. What do we think occurs? Oh, God, so many questions. First of all, how quick would a polar reversal occur?
Well, the actual polar reversal, from what we can gain from the scriptures and from other documents, ancient documents, it occurs very rapidly, usually within a one-day period. So it occurs when it finally goes, it goes extremely rapidly.
A one-day period?
Yes.
And in one day, the North Pole goes to roughly the South Pole or some new location, and South goes to North?
Yes.
Okay, if that were to occur, what is our best guess about what would happen?
Total destruction, basically. It would depend on where you were on the Earth's surface at the time the shift occurred, the direction of the shift.
Let's say I'm in Nevada.
I would think from the prophecies you'd be in a lot of trouble.
Well, what do you mean?
I think everybody in the United States of America is going to be in a lot of trouble. Because a shift...
Define trouble.
Destruction.
You mean dead?
Death, yes.
Well, what would kill us?
Well, let me just quote you from Isaiah, for example. Behold, the Lord maketh the earth empty, and maketh it waste, and turneth it upside down, and scattereth abroad the inhabitants thereof.
Okay, translate that into what that might mean scientifically.
Well, scientifically, that would mean that in a very short period of time, the North Pole becomes the South Pole, and actually probably goes beyond it.
Sure.
Because...
no, but I mean effects. When that happened, what...
Total destruction.
By what means?
By means of, well, shall we say, outside, almost outer space, cold coming down to the surface. The scriptures indicate a tremendous roll cloud develops. If you've seen major squall lines, you've seen these roll clouds.
Oh, listen, brother, I used to chase them.
All right.
I chased them looking for tornadoes, so yes, I'm extremely familiar with the roll cloud.
Okay, now multiply that roll cloud by a tremendous margin, because what happens is the surface of the Earth changes directions rapidly, but the atmosphere above it does not.
Wait a minute. The surface of the Earth changes directions.
Right. In a shift, the Earth is tilted at approximately 22.5, 23.5 degrees.
Right.
All right. Now, when a shift occurs,
right,
that tilt, the Earth, the North Pole, starts to slide to the south. Now, as it slides to the south, it is fairly solid, so the crustal part of the Earth just simply slides. But the Earth, or the atmosphere, does not catch up with it. It doesn't just move with it.
Oh, my God. You know, I once had somebody on here talking about polar shift, and he said there would be 800-mile-per-hour winds.
Oh, I would think probably at least that, probably even more.
And so, if I just heard you correctly, you're saying the Earth's surface would move, but the atmosphere wouldn't. The net effect, though, would be atmosphere moving by us, or us actually, it wouldn't make any difference. The net effect would be stupendous winds.
Yes. Yes. In fact, the atmosphere would actually begin to roll back as the surface of the Earth accelerates in the shift.
My.
Because the atmosphere cannot keep up with it. It begins to roll back, and it creates a huge vacuum area.
For the first time, I understand this.
And then air from the outer space comes down because it's super cold, and you have instant freeze of anything that happened to be there that would...
I take it you mean actually upper atmosphere,
yes.
the very thinner, very cold upper atmosphere.
Yes.
Anybody who's ever been in an airplane, one of the recent 747s, when you look at the outside temperature and you're only at like 40,000 feet, the outside temperature is like minus 80, minus 90 degrees typically.
Yeah, it gets pretty chilly up there.
Just that far up. So further up in the atmosphere, of course, it's if that were to suddenly come down...
Well, you have instant freeze, which probably explains the findings in Siberia and whatnot.
You mean the vegetation in the woolly mammoths?
Yes. Yes. Instant freeze. They were quick frozen in a split second. The only thing that would do that is super cold air approaching, because of wind chill factors.
And it would have to be very fast.
Oh, instantaneous. They would never know what hit them. Nobody would know what hit them. Huh. There will be warning signs.
Like what?
Well, we're already getting the warning signs. We're seeing changes in the weather patterns. The patterns are getting more and more violent.
Boy, I'll tell you, there's no question about that.
I think we're in the preliminary stages of a polar shift.
Now, let me tell you a little story. This is a true story. I could read it because I've got it here somewhere, but I know it by heart. The Fujita scale of tornadoes actually goes to 12, but that's just an academic study. Mm-hmm. On Earth, in our atmosphere, it is impossible to have the scientists say anyway, meteorologists, impossible to have anything greater than what's called an F5 tornado at 318 miles per hour. Now, that's exactly what we had, was 318 miles per hour. That is the very tip top of the F5 scale. At 319, which, by the way, they think they might have actually had, you would have an F6. And they say that's impossible. And yet, it occurred. And everybody who's been watching the weather maps knows the horrendous tornado season that we've had. And you're saying this is a harbinger.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, it's going to increase tremendously.
Then there's one more thing. And I've been dealing with this on my show now for 2 years. So I'll tell you about it. You can tell me if it means anything, Stuart. But from time to time, I will suddenly start getting all these emails and faxes, and people will start saying to me, hey, Art, guess what? My compass is suddenly deviating anywhere between 8 to 15 degrees west. And It's freaky. It's like the pole is wandering a little bit, and then it comes back.
Mm-hmm. Well, a magnetic pole shift probably will precede the actual literal pole shift. When the magnetic poles shift and go into, I guess, what you could call them a dipolar reversal, there is a period of time in which the magnetic field actually collapses, according to the scientists that have studied this.
In other words, goes to zero.
Goes to zero. During that time, of course, you have all the lethal rays from the sun, et cetera, your orbital mass ejections and all that.
Nothing to protect you from them, right?
That's right, because it's the magnetic field that actually does most of the protecting, which is one of the reasons why your satellites or manned satellites are below the Van Allen belt, because they're protected by the Van Allen belt itself from the more lethal rays of the sun.
So if suddenly it went to zero, in essence, we would be immediately, particularly if it's a bad solar cycle time, which, by the way, we happen to be coming up on.
Yes.
A solar maximum, they say, perhaps within the next year, you would then be wide open to a coronal mass ejection that could flip the poles?
Yes. Well, I don't know if it would actually literally create the polar shift, but it could certainly rearrange the magnetic poles tremendously. And there are some scientists that have done some research on this, and they claim that when the poles go to zero, that it has tremendous effects upon the Earth, great shaking of the Earth, and then it reorientates itself, and the North Pole becomes the South Pole, et cetera, et cetera.
Stuart, I have a fellow I interview from time to time named Major Ed Dames from SciTech, which is a remote viewing organization. He has remote viewed something that he calls a kill shot from the sun. And it sounds an awful lot like what you're talking about.
Could well be. There's no question that the sun is involved in this, because the time of the polar shift, according to the scriptures, and the time of a solar nova are the same. The Bible indicates in the Old Testament that the moon will give off the light of the sun, and the sun will give off 7 times the light it has now. Now, that can only be described as a mini nova.
You know, it's interesting you should mention this, because I've been reading these stories just in the last few days about scientists seeing these suns go into this apparent nova condition a lot lately. I mean, they've got all kinds of new information about it, and if other suns can do it, I mean, our sun is not that unusual.
That's right.
It could do it too, couldn't it?
It not only could, according to the prophecies, it will. And actually, the way the Lord worded it, he said the heavens will be shaken, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. In other words, things sort of go off from their normal course. The book of Enoch says the moon shall change its laws and not be seen for its proper period.
Would anybody on Earth live through such an event?
Yes, there are survivors. According to the scriptures, there are survivors.
Well,
not many.
How about scientifically? I don't in any way put down the scriptures, and I realize you're coming at this from a Christian perspective, which is fine. But scientifically, if what you suggest occurred, how would anybody live?
I think, again, it would depend on your location upon the planet in relationship to the spin of the polar shift itself. In other words, if you were in an area where you were sort of in the pivot area, probably not a whole lot would happen to you. But those on the outside of the shift, you see, would have tremendous damage.
Oh, I absolutely do see. In other words,